trying to deal with. And so the question, and in some ways you could sort of think that liberal democracy is based on a deal, that inequality in economic resources can be balanced by equality in political resources. In other words, that equal voice can somehow balance unequal wealth. Well, we're sort of way beyond that.
One man, one vote, one person, one vote has been overwhelmed by $100,000 and $1 million.
And it's not even just the money. If you live in a swing state, your vote counts so much more than if you live in New York or Illinois or California when it comes to electing a president. If you live in a swing district, when it comes to electing a member of Congress, your vote counts. If you live in a district that's been gerrymandered, so it's all Democrats or all Republicans, your vote does not count. So when you really look at whose votes count, it's a very, very small proportion. So we have some deep structural flaws that go all the way back to the beginning that it's not about us as a people or our culture, our beliefs. We're operating within a set of political institutions that distort and actually warp our capacity to express our beliefs. Maybe what we really need is an equal voice amendment to guarantee that each vote actually had equal weight. That'd be pretty radical. And if we actually designed a system that did that, now, would we get something like that tomorrow? No, probably not. But I guess my point is that there are a lot of sources of energy and change in the country, not to mention the world. A lot of it is generationally driven. It's in places that may be unexpected.
Let me come closer to where you and I are today. Occupy Wall Street did pull economic inequality out of the closet and put it at the breakfast table, the lunch table, the dinner table, and the political round tables on Sunday. But it didn't hang around to fight for it. What happened?
Well, I think Occupy made a great contribution in that it did what you just said. It took economic inequality, economic justice, and made it legitimate. But they got stuck. I mean, they got stuck on a tactic without a strategy that went beyond a tactic. And, one tactic doesn't build a movement. It takes venues in which people can strategize about how to move the ball forward. I mentioned at the beginning sort of these three elements of story, strategy, and structure that you sort of need to build a movement and organization. You got to have the narrative is the why we're doing it. And then the strategy is how we're doing it, not just one tactic, but what's our theory of change? What's our theory of how we're going to use our resources to influence those sources of power? And then what's our structure through which we're figuring all this stuff out and working at it? And so they had problems there. People confuse structure with oppression. And Joe Freeman wrote a great piece,
the feminist?
The feminist sociologist, called The Tyranny of Structurelessness. And I have all my students read it, where she argues, you think structurelessness, you're kidding yourself. Anytime a group of people get together, they're going to create a structure. The difference is whether it's visible or invisible, whether it's accountable or not, and whether it's open and above board, or whether it's all factionalized and personalistic. And so you choose what you want. And I think it's really honest. And so the rejection of structure is a sort of rejection of taking responsibility for self-governance.
So you talk about the power of story. And for the last 40 years, the story of the free market has been the triumphant story in American culture.
It really is, and it's powerful because it has a moral dimension, and it has a political dimension, and it has an economic dimension. It's sort of like that. The market means we're all free to make our own choices, so isn't that great because we want to be free? And it's all about choices. And politically, well, it's all based on people making their choices, and so that's democratic. And economically, well, we all know it's efficient, right? Because that's how markets work. And the problem is every one of those claims is fundamentally flawed and fundamentally an act of faith. I mean, Harvey Cox wrote this thing about the market as God. But the big question is, where's the missing alternative counter to that? And I think that is an enormous intellectual challenge for our time right now. Where's that alternative?
We need a new story.
We need a new story, but it's also a new way of describing our economic challenges and our political challenges that emphasizes not this idea of what each individual competes with each other individual as the answer, but the ways in which we cooperate and collaborate with one another as the answer. You know, Albert Hirschman, the development economist, wrote this book a number of years ago. I'm sure you know about exit, voice, and loyalty.
Right.
And sort of the idea was, okay, so you got an institution and it's screwing up, and so one way to fix it is to exercise voice. The other way is you can exit. The market solutions are all exit solutions.
Explain it.
Well, so you don't like the way the schools work? Exit. Make your own over here, and that way you exercise choice. You don't like the way public health works? Exit over here. Make your own. Now, the only problem is you can only exit and make your own if you got the money to do it.
Right.
And so the result is that you create these parallel systems of elite systems that are that fragment the whole. The public gets poorer and poorer and poorer, and you create all these little isolated golden ghettos all around a privilege. And the focus is on how do we find market solutions, when we should be saying how do we find more effective ways to exercise voice? How can we have more effective public deliberation? How can we bring more people into the process? How can we create the venues where people can actually learn and deliberate with one another?
Can you take this one step further or beyond government over to the leadership of other institutions, business leaders, educational leaders? I mean, how do we write a narrative that includes them in this new story of collaboration, cooperation?
You know, Carl Polanyi's book, The Great Transformation, written in 1941, sort of nailed it when he said, if you have a good that where price captures value, you can marketize it. And where price does not capture value, you cannot marketize it. And he was talking about labor and land when he was writing in 1941. And he was trying to explain the problem of the open market system after World War I that had wiped out all sorts of social structures that cleared the way for the rise of fascism in Europe. I mean, this was the context he was writing in. He was saying so the open market system was allowed to be a solvent that ground everything down because it doesn't respect values other than price values. Now, how do you put a price on education? Really? How do you put a price on health? Really? How do you put a price on art? Really? Now, when we price these things, we undermine their value. And so that's why we need churches. That's why we need schools whose value isn't based on pricing. It's based on a different set of understanding, and the resources that it generates doesn't depend on pricing. So I don't know. There's potentials out there. But I think somehow we need to get into this debate. We need to get into this argument and have it be about something really substantive, and not get drawn into these, we're too polarized or something. We need to be more polarized, but polarized around the right things.
Is there any kind of organizing like that going on?
There's a lot of organizing going on. I'm privileged to get to see it because I work with young people. Within the immigrant world, the Dreamers have done some great stuff. I mean, they do the organizing, the house meetings, the one-on-ones, all that good old organizing stuff. You know, the crew of young organizers that came out of the Dean campaign in 2003 in New
Howard Dean?
Hampshire. Yeah, 2003-4, and that crowd that have, percolated through Obama and all that in a variety of different ways, but they brought sound organizing techniques into electoral politics in a way that had disappeared. It had all been marketing. It was all marketing, and not that marketing's not there now in a big way, but the confusion between marketing and movement building is really a big one. And I think that's one of the things the environmental groups really, really missed the boat on. I think they thought that they could market their way to legislation. What I mean is that through polling and advertising, they could make what the changes they wanted palatable to enough of the people that they could, in that way, create enough of a ground that they would get the legislation. That's a marketing proposition. Movement building is, that you don't have a majority. What you got to do is build enough of a constituency that you can develop the power you need in order to achieve what you want. And so what you're doing is engaging people who engage other people who engage other people, and you build a movement that way.
Looking back on your life, is there a core to it? Is there a common denominator?
There were three questions posed by a first century Jerusalem scholar, Rabbi Hillel, when asked, how do we understand what we are to do in the world? And he responded with three questions. The first one is to ask yourself, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? It's not a selfish question, but it is a self-regarding question, sort of saying, ask yourself what you're about, what you value, what you have to contribute. But then the second question is, if I'm for myself alone, what am I? It's to even be a who and not a what is to recognize that we are in the world in relationship with others, and that our capacity to realize our own objectives is inextricably wrapped up with the capacity of others to realize theirs. And finally, if not now, when? The time for action is always now, because it's often only through action that we can learn what we need to learn in order to be able to act effectively in the ways that we intend. And the fact